So we were talking about all of that information, more or less where you have to arrange yourself when you are classifying information in your mind. Where does it go? In which of those 7 steps do you contain the most information on, and how far are you along that process? Now what we're going to look at is at number 7, at stage number 7, we're going to be talking about once the tender is awarded, what are the processes after you have awarded the tender to the contractor? What is the processes that occur after that, and when you finally end the project? So there are much more sophisticated diagrams than this. I'm actually going to show you one that was created by the JBCC that you find available in the JBCC documents, but I'm going to show you my version first. It's a little bit elementary, but let's see if it works, and hopefully it does make some things a bit more clear, because it doesn't look as intimidating. So I tried to draw it along a straight line to show you that it's more or less a linear process. So the tender is awarded. The tender, how you're getting work. You have now selected the contractor. Everyone's happy with this contractor. They are now going to be doing your project. They're going to be constructing your building. So once this happens, there has to be a site handover, an official giving of the site to the contractor, to which it now belongs to him. And remember, you should waive the lien or waiver the lien so that it doesn't technically legally belong to him. But you are handing over the site for this particular contractor to now commence construction. And so what you can see in the period after that is construction period. In that period, a number of things happen. Stuff is going to be constructed. Perhaps it's going to be interim sessions, interim meaning there's going to be portions in which the building is going to be built, or segments is going to be built. Then there needs to be interim payments. So payments so that the employer can pay the contractor so he can continue with his work. They don't want to give him the entire lump sum all at once. They want to give him portions so that he can continue with his work. There might be nominated or selected subcontractors who also need to be paid in this period. So this construction period is quite important because lots of payment needs to happen and lots of processes need to happen. If there's something wrong, there needs to be a revision to the dates that are given. If something is drastically wrong, then we need to perhaps revise the entire construction program. So in this construction period is where the thing is actually getting constructed. It's getting constructed all the way to the date of practical completion, right? That's the part we're looking at here, at practical completion. Now, when we're looking at practical completion can be defined as the stage or the date at which the person who is paying for the project, the employer, the client, can occupy the site. And so they need to be able to occupy it whilst the remainder of construction is still going on. It's the date when someone can occupy the site and feel safe enough to occupy it. And so this date has to be predetermined right at the very beginning, even before the site handover. It's when the contract commences. So when the contract commences, there must be a discussion of this date. And this is why the planning by the architectural professional is so important, because the architectural professional is going to say, here is this planning according to the Gantt chart. If it starts in January, it should end in December, and December should be the date for practical completion. If something goes wrong in the construction period, the contractor needs to tell this to the architect and the client so that they can revise it, and the revision of the practical completion date can be moved out. Now, there are times when the contractor will be held liable for such issues, and the times where he wouldn't be, when it's not his fault. And so this practical completion date, although it's determined, it can move depending on whatever happens. Say COVID had happened, then practical completion date had to be revised because we've had this force majeure, this worldwide event that is occurring that was beyond their control or their scope. But say the contractor had bad planning, then he may have to pay penalties. He'll have to do something to rectify the situation. And so practical completion date is a date that can be moved around depending on what the circumstances are during the construction phase. But once practical completion comes about, we have a defects liability period. This refers to the period in which, when there are problems, the contractor needs to sort those out for the building. Now, you will look at different documentation, and you'll see that the dates and the days and how long this period lasts differs greatly. That's because you're probably looking at some older documents. I would like you to look at the most recent documents about the 2018, if I'm not mistaken, JBCC, and it tells you something here about a 90-day defects liability period. So I'm going to write it here. 90 days, and I write it I will write it in a slightly different color here. I'll write it in orange so that you can see the difference. Just note that wherever there's black, I'm telling you those are intervals, those are when events happen. Red is the names of the events, and then the gray is telling you more or less what's happening in those periods. But I write in orange now just to bring it to your attention. So the defects liability period is 90 days. So once the client has moved into the place, they have for this period of 90 days, they can identify faults and issues and whatever it is, and the contractor will have to repair them and fix them up. But then there's this date of final completion. So that's when everything is done, all the problems have been sorted, and final completion occurs. They then hand over the site back to the client, and it's now in possession of the client, or the client has possession over his site again, his or her site or their site. And then from the date of final completion, you have a period, another period called latent defect liability period. I'll explain to you what that means now and how best to understand that, but that's a 5-year period. If you look at prior JBCC documents, prior to I think 2018 it was, if you look at something from 2007, it'll tell you it's a 3-year latent defect liability period, which is not the case anymore. So the numbers to remember here are 90 days for defects liability and 5 years for latent defect liability. Now, this means, if you look at the word latent, I'm going to show you here the definition of latent, and then I'll give you an idea of how to remember it. So let's go into Google very quickly, our best friend. So if you have a look, it says latent and patent defects. It says a latent defect is a fault that will not readily be revealed by a reasonable inspection of the property being sold. And a patent defect is a flaw that is not hidden and ought to be easily identified upon reasonable inspection. That sounds like a mouthful, but I guess it makes sense. For me, though, the best way to remember it is if I look at the word latent, it sounds like lazy. And, oops, see, I've knocked out my speakers here. Latent reminds me of the word lazy. And so generally when someone is lazy, you don't really see them around because they're never around. And so latent defects is the defects or are the defects you never see because they're not very evident. If you also have an understanding of the word dormant and latent, you can naturally derive that it means that it's not visible, not easily seen. But the opposite to that is the word patent. And so patent defects, I'll write it here. Patent defects are ones you can see. For me, perhaps the easiest way for me to remember the word patent is it looks like the word apparent. Apparent. And it's quite similar in the structure of the word. Apparent, patent, it's kind of similar. For me, it's easy to remember, but maybe not the same case for you. So apparent, you can see it. And latent is like lazy, you don't see it. So that's probably the best ways that I can explain defects. Now, defects are things that are wrong with it, or something that is visibly not correct, something that's visibly not normal or conforming to the way it should be. Whether it's a tile or whether it's a cracks in the floor or whether it's skewness of walls or whatever the case is, patent and latent defects. Now, there are some defects that won't show itself. And so those defects, if they happen to appear within a 5-year period after the building is completed, then there's an obligation upon the contractor to do his duty to come and repair those things. So that's what the 5-year latent defect liability period is for. So this is my explanation of it. Be able to get more or less a very quick overview, a very quick comprehension of what these things mean. I'm going to show you the JBCC one that I was able to find on the internet now. On this JBCC one that I was able to find on the internet for you, it's outdated, or let's have a look here. There's two actually that I found. This one here. This one here, you can see the date is August 2007. So you have information here that is outdated, but you can check out this document itself. I'll share it with you on the drive folders. But if you have a look at this one, which is seemingly a more recent and updated one, it's the same diagram that I've shown you. But I do feel as though its lack of color might be difficult to read if you can see color. So let's have a look at it in the way they explain it here as well. There's the date and site possession, meaning the date on which the site is handed over. And then in the construction period, you have interim dates, the same thing I mentioned, where payments are going to be made in interim payments. Then it says date of practical completion. And the date of practical completion is obviously the date where I mentioned it's practically completed, where someone's going to occupy the site. And then we have a look at the 90-day period, the 90-day period for defects liability, where if there's something that's evidently wrong, the contractor will have to fix it up. We then have the date for final completion. And from the date of final completion, you have 5 years, a 5 years latent defect liability period. You then can see there's another period of 3 years now. And we'll talk about it a bit later on what the 3 years is about. But I'm just trying to give or to express here that the diagram I showed you is more or less the same as this one. Just on that note, the diagram that I'd shown you, this colorful one here, the black shows the events that are occurring, points in time. That's why I have an arrow, points in time. The red is telling you the name of those events. The gray is telling you the period in which something is happening, and the orange is telling you the duration of that. And so what I've shown you here is the same thing that's on that document, and you see there's lots of different versions of this diagram. I just thought that this might be beneficial if I had to redraw it.